The definition of the word conspiracy, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is the act of conspiring, a combining of persons for an evil or unlawful purpose. Although the word and its usage is commonly used in today's society, it is worth looking back in time at its original meaning and to which situations it relates to best. None more does this term relate than that of the Kashmir Princess plane crash and the subsequent explanations and investigations into the disaster which occurred over the South China Sea in 1955. In this video, we will look at how the chartered aircraft met its demise, as well as the potential cover-ups and reasoning behind the explosion of a seemingly innocent flight from India via Hong Kong to Jakarta. Why did 16 people lose their lives whose intention was to simply report on a conference? Was the explosion actually an assassination attempt on the Chinese Prime Minister, Zhou Enlai? All this and more as we buckle up and take flight to discuss the mysterious downing of the Kashmir Princess. Before we delve into the intricacies and mystery surrounding the crash, let us go back and recall the facts of what happened on that day. The Kashmir Princess was a charter plane owned by the government under their flag-bearing name of Air India. The plane itself was a Lockheed L749A Constellation aircraft, which was used for a time by the likes of Air France, KLM, and Trans World Airlines, and was known for its large fuel capacity and being able to travel across the Atlantic Ocean non-stop. Created by the American manufacturer Lockheed, only a limited version of the aircraft was built and regularly used in the 1950s, with the model eventually retiring in 1993. Unfortunately, the L749A would not be remembered for its creative and aerial advancements. The date was the 11th of April, 1955. All 11 passengers and 8 crew members have safely departed Santa Cruz Airport, Bombay, and arrived at Kai Tak, which was the international airport of Hong Kong from 1925 to 1998. The second leg of the journey is due to commence from Kai Tak to Kemayoran Airport in Jakarta, Indonesia, and eventually takes to the sky for the second time at 4:25 AM GMT. The passengers on board range from Chinese and Vietnamese delegation staff to Austrian and Hong Kong-based Communist Party members, as well as journalists from China. Each of the passengers were en route to Indonesia for the same purpose, the Afro-Asian Bandung Conference. From April the 18th to April the 24th, delegates from 29 countries in Asia and Africa gathered together in what would be a momentous event, bringing together such countries from outside the Western world for the very first time. The convention, which also became known as the Bandung Conference, was held in Bandung, Indonesia, to discuss the challenges each of the attending nations faced after gaining independence from colonialism. Another major talking point of the event would revolve around US foreign policy and its condemnation, as well as that of Soviet guidelines and protocols. Sensing an opportunity, having already orchestrated revolutionary change in his own country, resulting in the creation of the People's Republic of China, founding father Mao Zedong would send his premier and foreign minister Zhou Enlai to the event. The hope being that China would guide the other member nations in anti-colonial, nationalist, and anti-imperialist movements, with Mao Zedong as its leader. The involvement and dispatch of Premier Enlai would be pivotal to the investigations centering on the Kashmir Princess's attack and eventual fate. As the plane continued towards its destination throughout the early hours of the morning, all seemed fine and well. However, at approximately 9:25 AM GMT, an aircraft maintenance engineer by the name of Karnik was awakened and startled by the faint sound of an explosion at the right-hand side of the aircraft. Smoke quickly followed and was seen emitting from the baggage compartments from behind the number 3 engine. As was the protocol in such instances, Captain D.K. Jatta shut off power to the damaged engine and released carbon dioxide into the baggage compartments as the Princess began its descent to the waters below. With the plane ditching rapidly towards the sea, a last-minute distress signal from the co-pilot, MC Dixit, was made and recorded before all went quiet and nothing more was heard from the doomed flight. It wouldn't have taken much longer before the L749, which was running only on 3 engines, crashed into the sea just off the Natuna Islands. All passengers were killed upon impact, with only 3 survivors: maintenance engineer A.S. Karnik, co-pilot MC Dixit, and a flight navigator by the name of J.C. Patak. All 3 men would, after 8 hours at sea, successfully reach the islands before eventually being rescued. No one could have imagined what these men and the souls of those who perished must have felt and seen as the Kashmir Princess fell from the skies. A harrowing story to emerge from the ill-fated flight was that of the pilot and a lady named Gloria Berry, who was an air hostess on board the Princess. It is said that after numerous attempts to persuade the captain to leave his post and attempt to escape, she would remain side by side with him until the very end. After the events of that fateful morning, Captain D.K. Jatta and Gloria Berry would be posthumously awarded the Ashok Chakra and the Kirti Chakra respectively by the Government of India in remembrance of their bravery and sacrifice. So, what caused the explosion on board the Kashmir Princess, and why were a group of seemingly innocent civilians subjected to one of the most horrific deaths imaginable? The conspiracy would eventually reveal itself and circle around the earlier mentioned Prime Minister of China, Zhou Enlai. It was no secret and most likely obvious that the passengers aboard the plane were invited guests or members of the press sent from various parts to cover the impending Afro-Asian conference in Bandung. It was a chartered flight that was making its way to the airport, which was approximately 75 miles from where the conference was being held. All initial checks were completed in Hong Kong before the Princess took to the skies on its second leg, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. To all intents and purposes, there was nothing sinister or missing, except one: Premier Zhou Enlai. With Chairman Mao intent on capitalizing on the political plans being discussed at the conference, he was sure to send his right-hand man and Minister of Foreign Policy, Enlai, to the meeting. His itinerary had scheduled him to fly from Beijing to Hong Kong before making the transshipment to the Kashmir Princess on 11th of April. However, not long before his initial scheduled flight, Enlai would have to postpone due to an emergency appendectomy operation that would see him miss his departure and ultimately save his life in the process. Seemingly unbeknownst at the time, and many concluding that Zhou Enlai was the human embodiment of luck, the Prime Minister would make the journey to Indonesia 3 days after the crash and in time for the conference. A meeting in Rangoon prior to the event between Enlai and the Prime Ministers of India and Burma would be conducted, and an investigation into the crash was immediately opened. The probe into the Kashmir Princess began with immediate finger-pointing. According to the Chinese government, the crash was a murder by the Special Service Organizations of the United States and Chiang Kai-shek. Kai-shek was a military leader and Chinese nationalist politician who in 1954 to 1955 was supported by the Americans for his governing in Taiwan, which China regarded as a threat. Part of the investigation, headed up by Hong Kong Governor Sir Alexander Grantham, stated that there was no signs of sabotage or pre-planned operations to target the plane. However, In the days following the initial reports, an Indonesian inquiry board would reveal from the wreckage the clockwork mechanism, which was not part of the aircraft or any of its machinery, was to blame. After the shock and realization that the mechanism found was actually a time bomb, complete with a US manufactured Mk7 detonation device, the rumors of a supposed assassination attempt on Zhou Enlai became front and center of the investigation. So what was it about Premier Enlai that would result in a failed murder attempt and the catastrophic consequence of the Kashmir Princess? Known to be a steadfast diplomat with a calm demeanor, Enlai's confidence was projected in his actions more than his words. Famous for ignoring US Secretary of State John Foster Dulles by refusing to shake his hand a year earlier, Enlai would potentially be a target for the Americans. Reason for this was China's presence amongst the group of nations attending the conference and the unwillingness to succumb to either Soviet or US influence. Such presence would certainly cement the nation's resistance. Though the detonator was manufactured in the States, US diplomats such as Henry Kissinger would distance themselves from the rumors of sabotage, famously stating in a face-to-face meeting with Enlai, "As I told the Prime Minister the last time, he vastly overestimates the competence of the CIA." The possible involvement of US forces would still remain, as many still believed that the mechanics used to ignite the fuse were supplied to the Taiwanese governing bodies and subsequently planted when the plane was stationed in Hong Kong. The layover at Kai Tak became the next focus of the investigation and opened a new mystery involving three countries: Hong Kong, Taiwan, and USA yet again. The obvious questions of who planted the bomb on the aircraft and their whereabouts following the crash were paramount and needed answering. Spotlight would shine upon a janitor who worked for the Hong Kong Aircraft Engineering Corporation named Zhou Zemin. Having already offered a reward of 100,000 Hong Kong dollars and conducted numerous interviews, interrogations and discussions with the staff and crew of Air India, the name Zhou Zemin would continually arise. In the days leading up to the bombing of the Kashmir Princess, Hong Kong authorities would discover that Zhou Zemin had been spending large sums of money, which was not the norm for a person living on a janitor's wage. This would lead the authorities to zone in on the agency he worked for, as well as the man himself, which resulted in a warrant being issued for his arrest. After a series of searches were carried out, it would come to light that a man resembling Zemin had left Hong Kong and flown to Taiwan on the 18th of May, just a month after investigations were opened. His method and transportation of fleeing his homeland would be called into question, as aerial logs would show the culprit as having boarded a civil air transport carrier flight. CAT flights were often conducted and frequented by CIA contract air carriers around the region, and so the US government were back in the spotlight as suspects in the case. However, after the face-to-face meetings involving Henry Kissinger and the intelligence agency's apparent evidence to the contrary, the case surrounding the downing of the Kashmir Princess would conclude with the finger being firmly pointed towards Taiwan. Due to the results and casualties of the Korean War, Taiwan's connections with the United States would diminish, even though it was brought under US treaty protection. The sensitivity of allegiance between the nations was exemplified as a result of the Taiwan Straits crisis, which occurred between 1954 and 1955. The People's Republic of China, PRC, and the Republic of China, ROC, in the 1950s culminated in two separate armed clashes over strategic islands in the Taiwan Strait. In between these conflicts, Premier Enlai's visit to Indonesia proved to be an opportunity for the Taiwanese armed forces to take out one of their main rivals, as their seat at the global table was increasingly under threat. For this reason, the attention would revert back to Chiang Kai-shek and his one-party leadership in Taiwan, the Kuomintang. Avenging the loss of several islands in the lead-up to the Straits Battle in 1954 was primary motive for the assassination attempt, and so, as publicized evidence suggests, the KMT put together their master plan. By drafting a local key worker at the airport in Kai Tak, who was easily manipulated by money due to gambling debts, Zhou Zemin would be the man to plant the bomb as opposed to shooting or stabbing the Prime Minister. It would eventually be documented and determined through a Chinese Foreign Ministry conclusive dossier that the KMT was responsible for the explosion and that Zhou Zemin, who had numerous aliases, was the fugitive. Not only were the KMT's obvious motives taken into account, the fact that the Taiwanese government would not extradite Zemin to the PRC and that proof emerged of their special operation groups in Hong Kong, which were responsible for assassinations and sabotage, solidified their decision. So after all the finger-pointing, denial and investigations, it would be the Chinese and Hong Kong government's judgment that the KMT were indeed behind the explosion, and so the case was effectively closed. But what about the other theory that began to circle amongst the conspiracy community? The belief, as documented in the 1994 edition of scholarly journal, the China Quarterly, is one which, if true, could have changed the socio-political landscape of all countries involved. Professor Steve Tang of Oxford University claimed that Zhao knew of the plot beforehand and secretly changed his travel plans, though he did not stop a decoy delegation of lesser cadres from taking his place. Tang goes on to state that Enlai had informed British intelligence that he was aware of a potential plot 3 days before the flight, which is a remarkable admission, especially as the plane was allowed to continue on its original schedule. Or was it? According to Tang, the flight from Hong Kong was originally planned for 18th of April, and even though the Prime Minister was unaware of the change, could this be evidence that the PRC was fully aware of a bomb plot? If so, and with a review of the passenger list on 7th of April, a day before Enlai claimed limited knowledge of a scheme against him, adds validity to the conspiracy. Another concerning issue with regards to the timing revelations was that of Vice Foreign Minister Zhang Weishan's admission on the morning of 13th of April. Not even 2 days after the crash and before the cause of the blast had been decided, Weishan had disclosed via documentation about the plane exploding and crashing into flames. Did the government know that the Kashmir Princess would meet its fate in this way? In any case, the Prime Minister would escape death and make the conference with or without outside influence. For those who boarded the Kashmir Princess on that fateful day, such influence was nowhere to be seen. In today's political landscape, and at a time when political movements and those in power not only divide opinion, but give rise to conspiracy theories and lack of trust, the case of the Kashmir Princess should remain within the discussion. As the dictionary states, the combining of persons for an evil or unlawful purpose can certainly be used to describe the great conspiracy theory that is, the mysterious downing of the Kashmir Princess. Thank you once again for watching this episode, and always remember, question everything.